"Sir, this seat isn't yours." Walter Hayes didn't look up right away. He kept his eyes on the window, on the gray Atlanta morning pressing flat against the terminal glass, on the baggage carts moving slow and small across the tarmac below. His wooden cane rested against the armrest. His hands were folded in his lap. He looked like a man who had made peace with the world a long time ago and hadn't found any reason to unmake it since. "Sir," he turned then, slowly, and he looked at the flight attendant standing over him the way a man looks at something he has seen before. Not the face, not the uniform, but the expression underneath both. The certainty, the assumption wearing the costume of professionalism. "I heard you," Walter said. "I just didn't agree with you." For a moment, no one moved. The forward cabin of United Airlines Flight 2247, Atlanta to Los Angeles, had gone the particular kind of quiet that fills a room when something is happening that everyone recognizes but nobody wants to name. Forks down, laptops half closed, coffee cups held mid-air. 34 passengers and 14 first-class seats, and every single one of them was watching. The flight attendant, name tag reading Cassandra, 11 years with the airline, 3 months from a promotion, straightened her posture. Her voice dropped half a register, the kind of drop that isn't quieter so much as harder. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me while we sort this out." Walter reached into his jacket pocket and removed a worn, cream-colored envelope. He set it on the tray table in front of him without opening it, without explaining it. He simply looked at Cassandra and said 4 words. "Sort what out, exactly?" She didn't have an answer. She reached for her radio instead. What Cassandra Price set in motion in the next 11 minutes would end her career, cost the airline $4.3 million, and force an entire industry to ask a question it had spent decades avoiding. And it all began because she looked at one old man in a worn jacket and made the one assumption that would destroy everything she had spent 11 years building. She assumed he didn't belong. What she never once considered, what not a single person on that plane had thought to ask, was whose name was printed on all 14 of those tickets, every last one of them. If you've ever been looked at like you don't belong somewhere you paid for, stay with me, because this story is for you. But none of it started at 37,000 feet. It started 61 years earlier on the east side of Birmingham, Alabama, in a house where the water heater worked 3 days out of 7, and the front porch steps had needed fixing since 1954. Walter James Hayes was born in 1943, the youngest of 5 children, to a steelworker father and a schoolteacher mother who believed, with the particular ferocity of women who have been told they can't, that her children would build things, not just survive, build. His father lost 2 fingers to a mill press in 1959. Walter was 16. He dropped out of school the following Monday, told no one, and took a job hauling scrap metal 6 days a week to keep the lights on. At night, after his mother thought he was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table under a bare bulb and taught himself mechanical drafting from a library book with someone else's name still stamped inside the cover. He won a partial scholarship to Georgia Tech at 22, first black student in the civil engineering department. The professor who interviewed him spent 11 minutes trying to talk him into a different program. Walter sat through all 11 minutes, thanked the man for his time, and enrolled anyway. He founded Hayes Engineering Consultants in 1971 from a single rented room in Atlanta with a used drafting table, 1 client, and $1,400 saved over 4 years. Over the next 48 years, his firm designed load-bearing infrastructure for 14 American cities, bridges, transit corridors, municipal water systems. Federal contracts with the Department of Transportation totaling $312 million. He turned down a buyout offer in 1998 for $67 million. His exact words to the acquiring firm's representative were short enough to fit on a note card. "I built it for us, not for you." He sold it in 2017 at 74, to a black-owned investment group he personally vetted for $112 million. His wife Dorothy had died the year before, 49 years of marriage. She went in October 2016, quietly, the way she had done most things. She had always wanted to see Los Angeles, had talked about it the way people talk about things they keep meaning to get to. They had booked a flight for Christmas 2016. She never made it. Walter had kept a ticket envelope, the same worn cream-colored leather one Dorothy had given him in 1987, the year they finally stopped worrying about money. He had printed new tickets inside it for this trip 3 years later, because some things you carry forward, even when you can't explain why, to anyone who wasn't there. In his breast pocket, folded once, was a note his 8-year-old granddaughter Lily had pressed into his hand at the front door the morning he left. 3 words in red crayon on the back of a grocery receipt. Fly for Grandma. He hadn't shown it to anyone. Nobody on Flight 2247 knew any of that. All they saw was an old man in a worn jacket, sitting in first class with a wooden cane and a paper sack. And for one flight attendant, that was already more than enough to know. Cassandra Price had wanted to work in the sky since she was 9 years old, sitting in seat 14C on a Delta flight from Charlotte to Orlando, watching the flight attendant move through the aisle with the kind of calm authority that made a child think, that is a person who belongs everywhere. She had worked for that feeling for 11 years, earned her senior cabin certification at 28, requested premium routes specifically, transatlantic, transcontinental, the flights where the seats were wide and the passengers were, in her own words to a colleague once, people who know how to travel. She was 3 months from promotion to head cabin coordinator for the Atlanta hub. Her supervisor had used the word inevitable in her last performance review. She was not a cruel person. That is the important thing to understand. She did not think of herself as someone who made unfair judgments. She thought of herself as professional, precise, someone who read a room and responded accordingly. What she had never once been required to examine was the question of whether the room she was reading had been built on a foundation she hadn't chosen but had inherited anyway, and accepted, quietly, without ever looking down at what she was standing on. In the 18 months before Flight 2247, Cassandra had filed 14 passenger conduct reports. 12 of the 14 involved passengers of color. 2 informal complaints had been submitted against her to the airline's HR department by passengers who described the same experience in nearly identical language. A tone, a look, an assumption dressed as procedure. Both complaints had been reviewed. Both had been closed. The HR notation on the second one read, "No actionable pattern identified." She had boarded Flight 2247 at 5:48 a.m., feeling the specific, settled confidence of someone who has never been seriously wrong about anything she couldn't eventually explain away. She noticed Walter Hayes during her final sweep of the forward cabin before door close. Seat 1A, worn jacket, frayed cuffs, work trousers, wooden cane against the armrest, a paper sack on the floor instead of a carry-on. She ran her eyes across the manifest on her tablet. Walter Hayes, confirmed, 1A. She looked at the seat, looked at the man, looked back at the empty seats surrounding him. 1B, 1C, the entire second row, the third, all first class, all empty, all confirmed under the same name. Her mind did not go to the obvious explanation. It went instead to the comfortable one. There's been an error somewhere. She straightened her jacket, walked to the forward galley, and picked up the interphone. Stay right here, because what happens in the next 8 minutes is going to make you want to call someone. She was already moving back down the aisle before she'd finished deciding what she was going to say. 14 empty seats. One old man with a cane, and a certainty in her chest that had never once asked permission to be there. She stopped at row 1, leaned down slightly, and said the words that would define the rest of her career. "Sir?" There's been a mistake. Walter Hayes turned from the window, and for the second time that morning, he looked at her with that same expression. Not anger, not surprise, but the specific, unhurried patience of a man who has been told there has been a mistake about him more times than he can count, and has long since stopped being wounded by it. Has there, he said. It was not a question. Cassandra called it a boarding verification issue. That was the phrase she used when she radioed Derek Stoll, the second attendant, and when she flagged Captain James Okafor over the intercom. A boarding verification issue. Clean language, procedural, the kind of phrase that makes something ugly sound like paperwork. Captain Okafor came through the cockpit door at 6:44 a.m. 52 years old, former Air Force, 19 years with the airline without a single conduct review. He was the kind of man who read a room in 3 seconds and spent the next 30 making sure he was reading it correctly. He stepped into the forward cabin, saw Walter in 1A, saw Cassandra standing with her hands folded in front of her, and saw Derek hovering 2 steps behind her, like punctuation after a sentence that hadn't ended well. He looked at Walter. Walter looked back. Cassandra spoke first. Her voice was measured, professional, the voice she used when she needed authority to sound like reason. Captain, the passenger in 1A has been unable to produce documentation consistent with a confirmed first-class booking. Given the irregularity, I recommend we ask him to move to economy while we verify with the gate. The cabin was absolutely silent. Walter reached out and placed one hand on a cream-colored envelope on his tray table. He did not open it. He did not raise his voice. He said with the same unhurried steadiness he had carried since the moment Cassandra first spoke to him, "Captain, my name is Walter Hayes. I have 14 confirmed first-class tickets under my name on this flight. The confirmation numbers are in that envelope. I'd appreciate it if someone read them before asking me to go anywhere." Cassandra's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Sir, until we verify." "You've had the manifest for 26 minutes, Walter said. Nobody breathed. Captain Okafor picked up the envelope, opened it, read. His expression did not shift, not 1 degree, but something behind his eyes moved. He turned one page, then another. 14 confirmation numbers, 14 seat assignments, one name on every single one. In row 3B, a woman named Sandra Kowalski, 58, a retired school principal from Decatur, put her hand over her mouth. In 2A, a man in a gray suit closed his laptop for the first time since boarding. In 4C, a 19-year-old named Priya Anand stopped scrolling, raised her phone, and pressed record. Her mother reached across the armrest and did not stop her. At the forward doorway, Air Marshal Marcus Webb stood with his arms crossed. He had seen the manifest 40 minutes ago. He had said nothing because nobody had asked him. Now Cassandra turned to him with an expression that expected rescue. Marcus looked at her steadily. "He paid for all of them, Cass." The sentence landed in the cabin the way a stone lands in still water, a single impact, and then rings spreading outward in every direction at once. Cassandra stood completely still. For the first time in 11 years of reading rooms and responding accordingly, she did not know what to do next. The confidence that had moved her down that aisle 20 minutes ago had not disappeared. It had simply run out of ground to stand on. Captain Okafor set the envelope back on Walter's tray table. He straightened. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and absolute, and carried the full weight of 19 years in the air. "Mr. Hayes, on behalf of this crew, I apologize. These are your seats, all of them. You are our only first-class passenger today." He turned to Cassandra. He said 4 words, not loud, not cruel, final. "Go to the back." Walter did not smile. He did not look at Cassandra as she walked away. He turned back to the window, to the gray Atlanta morning that was just beginning to lighten at the edges. And he reached into his breast pocket and touched, without removing it, the small folded rectangle of a grocery receipt with 3 words written on it in red crayon. He closed his eyes. Outside, the first baggage cart of the morning moved slow and quiet across the tarmac. The jet bridge pulled away, and Flight 2247 began to move. Priya Anand's video was 11 seconds long. It showed nothing dramatic. No shouting, no struggle, no tears. Just a captain in a white uniform standing at the front of a first-class cabin, speaking to an old man with a cane. And 4 words, "Go to the back," directed at the woman who had put them both in that position. 11 seconds. No caption, no explanation. Priya posted it at 7:03 a.m. from somewhere over Tennessee with the single-word description, "This." By the time Flight 2247 crossed into Texas airspace, the video had been viewed 800,000 times. By the time the wheels touched down at LAX, it had crossed 4.1 million. The airline's social media team flagged it at 8:47 a.m. By 9:15, it had been escalated to the VP of Customer Experience, then to the Chief Communications Officer, then to a crisis room on the 14th floor of the airline's Atlanta headquarters, where 7 people sat around a conference table trying to determine, with increasing urgency, exactly who Walter Hayes was. It did not take long. The AP filed its piece at 11:03 a.m. The headline was 21 words and needed to be every single one of them. Man asked to leave first class despite holding all 14 tickets, sold engineering firm for $112 million. Bloomberg followed 40 minutes later with a full business profile, the Georgia Tech scholarship, the $312 million in federal contracts, the 2017 sale, the buyout he refused in 1998. A professor who had taught Walter in 1965 gave a quote that ran in 17 publications by nightfall. Walter Hayes was the most quietly brilliant person I ever encountered. He never needed anyone to know how important he was. That was always the point. The airline's official statement posted at 2:17 p.m. 83 words. The phrase, "We are committed to ensuring all passengers," appeared twice. It generated 14,000 comments in the first 90 minutes. Not one of them was favorable. Cassandra Price was placed on administrative leave at 3:45 p.m. By the following morning, a reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had obtained, through a Freedom of Information request to the FAA, a record of 14 passenger conduct reports filed by a senior attendant on premium routes over 18 months. 12 involved passengers of color. The story ran the next day under a headline that did not need to work very hard to land. Walter did not watch any of it. He had switched his phone off somewhere over New Mexico and had not turned it back on. His daughter Renee met him at arrivals. She had been crying, though she would later say she wasn't sure exactly when she had started. She pulled him into a hug at the bottom of the escalator and held on longer than usual. Walter patted her back twice, asked if she had brought coffee. She laughed in spite of everything. He smiled for the first time all day. If this story has hit something real in your chest, share it. Not for the numbers, because stories like this one don't move anything sitting in one inbox. They only work when people carry them. Outside LAX, the December California sun was low and gold and warmer than Walter had expected. He stood on the curb for a moment before getting in the car, tilted his face up toward it, closed his eyes. Dorothy would have loved it here. 6 months before Walter Hayes boarded Flight 2247, his grandson Marcus had called him from an airport in Charlotte. Marcus was 19, pre-med at Morehouse. He had saved for 4 months to buy a first-class ticket home for Thanksgiving, wanted to surprise his mother, wanted to do it right, wanted to sit in one of those wide seats just once and feel what it felt like to belong somewhere that expensive without apologizing for it. He had been asked to move before the door closed. No reason given, no paperwork filed, just a flight attendant, a request, and the particular silence of a cabin full of people who watched and said nothing. Marcus had moved. Then he had walked to the back of the plane and called his grandfather from row 27, with his voice doing something it hadn't done since he was 11 years old. Walter had listened to the whole thing, said nothing. When Marcus finished, Walter told him he loved him. Then he hung up. Then he sat in his kitchen in Atlanta for a long time, in the quiet Dorothy used to fill, just by being in the next room. 3 days later, he called his travel agent and booked all 14 seats on Flight 2247. He told his attorney, Patricia Osei, the full story 7 days after landing. Patricia, 58, 22 years in civil rights litigation, filed a formal discrimination complaint with the Department of Transportation the following week, citing a pattern of racially discriminatory enforcement in premium cabin procedures. The case settled 14 months later for $4.3 million. Walter directed $4.1 million to a scholarship fund at Georgia Tech in Dorothy's name, designated specifically for Black engineering students. He kept $200,000, gave every dollar of it to Marcus for medical school. Cassandra Price did not appeal her termination. The airline never issued a second statement, but Walter wasn't finished. Not quite yet. 3 weeks after the settlement, Walter Hayes requested a 20-minute phone call with the airline's CEO, David Chen. No attorneys present, no press, no list of demands. Chen expected a final blow. What he got instead stopped him mid-breath. "I don't want another apology," Walter said. "I want one thing, real training, not the compliance kind that people sit through and forget before lunch. The kind that teaches a person to stop before they move and ask themselves one question." He paused. "What am I assuming? And what if I'm wrong?" Chen was quiet for a moment. "That's it?" "That's it." The airline implemented a mandatory implicit bias review protocol across all premium cabin procedures 8 months later. Before any passenger conduct escalation, one question required, documented, on record. Walter's question, word for word. He never gave a single interview about it, never posted, never appeared on a panel or accepted an invitation to speak. He went back to Atlanta, back to his garden, back to Sunday dinners with Renee and Marcus and Lily. On the last Sunday of December, Lily climbed into his lap after dinner and asked if he had taken the note on the plane. He reached into his shirt pocket and unfolded the grocery receipt. 3 words in red crayon, soft at the edges now from being folded and unfolded more times than he could count. "Fly for Grandma." "I had it the whole time," he told her. Lily nodded seriously, the way 8-year-olds do when something confirms exactly what they already knew. Outside, the Atlanta evening was cold and clear and full of stars. Walter Hayes sat on his porch with his coffee going cold in his hand and his cane leaning against the railing, looking up at a sky that had never once, in 76 years, managed to make him feel small. Subscribe if you're here for the stories that don't make the front page. Tap the bell, because the next one is already coming.